These are the biggest political hoaxes of the 21st century, starting with the lie that started the war in Iraq.
The Iraqi regime possesses and produces chemical and biological weapons. It is seeking nuclear weapons.
In 2003, Americans were led to believe that Saddam Hussein possessed stockpiles of weapons of mass destruction. President George W. Bush, Vice President Dick Cheney, and Secretary of State Colin Powell all pushed this claim as core justification for the Iraq War. Cheney emphatically declared, "There is no doubt that Saddam Hussein now has weapons of mass destruction." Powell even held up a vial at the UN as supposed proof of Iraqi bioweapons. But after the invasion, the US-Iraq Survey Group's final report in 2004 found no actual stockpiles of chemical, biological, or nuclear weapons in Iraq. Saddam's regime had idle programs and ambitions, but the deadly WMD stockpile simply did not exist. This hoax cost trillions of dollars and thousands of American lives. It showed how the establishment's false narrative dragged America into a war under false pretenses. After the 2014 police unaliving of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri, a manufactured slogan swept the country: "Hands up, don't shoot." The claim was that Brown had his hands up in surrender, saying "don't shoot." This rallying cry ignited protests and was endlessly repeated in the fake news. However, it never actually happened. President Obama's own Justice Department debunked this hoax in a 2015 report. Multiple reliable witnesses and autopsies confirmed Brown did not surrender with his hands up. Rather, he fought the officer and tried to grab his gun. Even liberal Washington Post columnist Jonathan Capehart admitted the narrative was built on a lie and that
Brown never surrendered with his hands up, and Wilson was justified in shooting Brown.
Despite this, the radical left clung to the false slogan, fueling anger and riots over a hoax that unfairly painted police as monsters. The moment Donald Trump won in 2016, the Clinton campaign and Washington establishment pushed the Russiagate hoax, a conspiracy theory that Trump had colluded with Russia to steal the election. For years, cable news and Democrats saturated the airwaves with wild claims that Trump was a Kremlin pawn. They touted the discredited Steele dossier, filled with absurd fabrications like the P-tape, as evidence. High-ranking officials like Little Adam Schiff insisted proof of collusion was in plain sight. The FBI under James Comey used false pretenses to spy on Trump associates based on the hoax. In 2019, after a $32 million inquiry, special counsel Robert Mueller found no evidence of any Trump-Russia conspiracy. His report debunked the core collusion claim completely. It turned out the only real Russia disinformation came from Hillary Clinton's camp, who funded the fake dossier. Russiagate was a political dirty trick that spiraled into a years-long witch hunt, paralyzing a presidency and poisoning political discourse. In August 2017, violence broke out at the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia. People from all walks of right traveled there to protest the removal of a Confederate statue. Afterward, President Trump disavowed neo-Nazis and called for peace. But the media seized on one misleading snippet of his remarks, that there were very fine people on both sides, to falsely claim Trump praised neo-Nazis. This is flat out wrong. Trump explicitly said in that same press conference,
and I'm not talking about the neo-Nazis and the white nationalists, because they should be condemned totally.
He was referring to nonviolent protesters on both sides of a debate over a Confederate statue. Those contextual lines were conveniently edited out by many outlets. The Fine People hoax became a perennial talking point to smear Trump as a racist, even though the full transcript proves he did not praise white supremacists. Years later, outlets like CNN and PolitiFact had to admit the context, but the damage was done. This hoax shows how the media can twist words to manufacture a false racist narrative. When Justice Brett Kavanagh was nominated to the Supreme Court in 2018, opponents tried to destroy him with unverified allegations. The ugliest was the claim that Kavanagh orchestrated gang rapes in high school, pushed by disgraced lawyer Michael Avenatti and his client Julie Swetnick. The media ran wild with these shocking accusations, but it quickly fell apart. Swetnick's story kept changing and lacked any real evidence. Even NBC News found her account shaky, yet sat on that info during the frenzy. Ultimately, no witnesses corroborated Swetnick's claims, and Avenatti himself was later convicted, not against Kavanagh, but for fraud unrelated to the case, proving his lack of credibility. In fact, another accuser unrelated to Avenatti admitted she made up her tale as a tactic to block Kavanaugh's confirmation. The Senate even referred certain false claims for criminal investigation. Kavanaugh was confirmed, but only after this smear campaign put his family through hell. It was a stark example of guilty until proven innocent tactics against a conservative, and it was all based on a hoax. In January 2019, a video went viral showing a group of white teenagers, one wearing a MAGA hat, seeming to confront a Native American elder, Nathan Phillips, in Washington, D.C. The media instantly painted the teens as racist aggressors who surrounded and mocked a peaceful Native protester. The boys were doxxed, vilified, and even received death threats. But then the full 2-hour video came out, utterly debunking the narrative. It revealed that the Native American man had approached the boys, drumming in the face of teenager Nick Sandman, who simply stood there smiling. Prior to being approached, the students were the targets of vile taunts by a radical group called the Black Hebrew Israelites, and the boys stayed calm. Reason magazine wrote, noting the kids did not harass anyone. Even Phillips's claim that they chanted "Build the Wall" was unproven and likely false. In short, the teens were smeared based on a selectively edited hoax. Major outlets had to settle defamation lawsuits for their rush to judgment. This episode showed how eager activists and journalists were to believe the worst about Trump supporters. In January 2019, failed actor Jussie Smollett claimed he was the victim of a heinous hate crime in downtown Chicago. He said 2 white Trump supporters attacked him at 2 a.m., shouting racist and homophobic slurs and yelling, "This is MAGA country," while putting on a noose around his neck. Politicians and the fake news rushed to embrace the story. Kamala Harris even called it an attempted modern-day. But within weeks, Smollett's tale fell apart as a calculated hoax. Chicago police uncovered that Smlet had paid 2 Nigerian brothers $3,500 to stage the fake attack. Surveillance footage, phone records, and the brothers' testimony proved Smlet choreographed everything. In 2021, a jury convicted Smlet on 5 counts of felony disorderly conduct for lying to police. A judge lambasted him for wasting resources and stoking racial tensions. Smlet later had the conviction overturned on a legal technicality, but even that court emphasized it has nothing to do with his innocence, and that overwhelming evidence showed he did orchestrate a fake hate crime. This hoax was a sick attempt to smear Trump supporters as violent bigots, and the media lapped it up until the truth emerged. In October 2020, just weeks before the presidential election, the New York Post broke a story on Hunter Biden's abandoned laptop, which contained emails pointing to Joe Biden's knowledge of his son's foreign business deals, including pay-to-play schemes. Almost immediately, the establishment struck back to suppress and discredit the story. Twitter and Facebook banned sharing the story, an unprecedented act of censorship. Dozens of former intelligence officials, called the 51, signed a letter insinuating the laptop was Russian disinformation, giving Joe Biden a talking point to dismiss it. The fake media largely ignored or poured skepticism on the revelations, but it was all a lie. The laptop was authentic all along. Over a year later, even outlets like the New York Times finally admitted the emails were real and authenticated. In fact, the laptop never had any Russian ties. It was Hunter's own computer and contents. The Russian disinfo angle was a hoax pushed by the security state establishment to protect Biden. By bearing this story, they likely influenced the 2020 election. One poll showed a significant chunk of Biden voters might have reconsidered had they known about the laptop's corruption evidence. This cover-up hoax demonstrated an unholy alliance of big tech, ex-spooks, and the media to manipulate information and swing an election. Beyond the laptop, the entire 2020 election saw an extraordinary campaign of narrative control by the elites. Time magazine later revealed a well-funded cabal of powerful people across big tech, big media, labor, and business working in secret to influence perceptions, change rules and laws, steer media coverage, and control the flow of information. They dubbed this a heroic effort to fortify the election, but in plainer terms it meant suppressing information and rigging the public debate. For example, negative stories about Biden, like the laptop, were systematically smothered, while social media giants aggressively censored or fact-checked content that might hurt the Democrat narrative. Mainstream outlets downplayed issues like the summer 2020 riots or flagged any discussion of election integrity as misinformation. This coordinated effort, a true election interference hoax, was later bragged about in that Time article, which literally described it as a conspiracy to control the flow of information. In short, the establishment united to trick the public by omission and suppression, all the while claiming they were saving democracy. There was nothing transparent about it. This so-called shadow campaign is now out in the open, and it confirms every suspicion that a powerful few colluded to deceive voters in 2020. For years, the media told us Joe Biden was fine, healthy, sharp. just a regular old guy who liked ice cream. They mocked anyone who pointed out the obvious, that something wasn't right.
I think what we see on stage with Joe Biden, Jake, is very clearly a cognitive decline.
Okay.
That's what I'm referring to. It makes me uncomfortable
You are
to watch somebody on stage search for
It's so amazing.
questions
It's so amazing to me
and try and figure out an answer.
A cognitive decline.
Well, when you're trying to tell me that what I was suggesting was
I think that you were mocking his stutter.
Yeah,
I think you were mocking his stutter, and I think you have absolutely no standing to diagnose somebody's cognitive decline.
Clips of him freezing, mumbling, wandering off stage, they went viral constantly. But instead of addressing the concerns, the media claimed we were being manipulated, even though the raw footage spoke for itself. Whenever Biden seemed confused or dazed, they said it was just right-wing editing. CNN, MSNBC, even the White House press team all said it was totally normal. But behind the scenes, it wasn't. His team kept him on short scripts, no press conferences, no tough interviews. Everything was tightly managed, and for good reason. Even allies started asking questions. Big-name Democrats tried to avoid the topic. The White House doctor refused to release full cognitive test results, and when Americans raised concerns, they were told they were spreading disinformation. Now, in 2025, the cracks are impossible to hide.
So I feel like everybody expects.
I've done it all because I'm loyal. I do it every damn year. At the very beginning. Never forget my team.
I feel like everybody didn't know what to expect of you today, and then you get here and you're speaking powerfully, you look good, you're confident. What do you say to all those people? Don't count you out.
What?
Well, I say lots of luck in the senior year.
Even liberal news outlets have changed their tone. The same people who insisted he was totally fine now admit he's not. The healthy and normal image of Biden was one of the most protected hoaxes in modern politics, and it worked. Until it didn't. In September 2020, The Atlantic published an anonymously sourced story claiming President Trump had disparaged fallen American soldiers, allegedly calling them losers and suckers during a 2018 trip to France. The media and Biden campaign ran wild with outrage.
The report includes new details about President Trump's 2018 visit to France to mark 100 years since World War I. Goldberg cites 4 different sources on President Trump's cancellation of a visit to the Ain-Marne cemetery near Paris, where American Marines were killed. In a conversation with senior staff members on the morning of the scheduled visit, Trump said, "Why should I go to the cemetery? It's filled with losers." In a separate conversation on the same trip, Trump referred to the more than 1,800 Marines who were lost at Belleau Woods as suckers for getting killed.
Trump strongly denied it, calling the story a hoax, just like
Russia was a hoax. It was a total hoax, no collusion. Just like so many other things. It's a hoax.
Notably, over a dozen officials who were on that trip went on record to debunk the story. Even John Bolton, no friend of Trump, confirmed the trip was canceled only due to bad weather, and he didn't hear Trump say anything like that. Former Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders, who was present, said this never happened, total BS. The only sources for the smear remain anonymous with zero proof. In reality, this story looks like yet another media hit job, unverified gossip used to paint Trump as anti-military right before an election. It has never been proven true, a classic character assassination hoax that the press elevated without evidence. Ever wonder what the fake news is saying, but don't want to lose more brain cells? Ground News shows you media bias at a glance, so you can watch the meltdown without getting sucked in. Use my link to get 40% off and support the MAGA Mark channel. Now back to the video. When the COVID-19 pandemic began, some raised the possibility that the virus leaked from the Wuhan Institute of Virology in China, a lab known for researching bat coronaviruses. In early 2020, the media and public health officials labeled the lab leak idea a crazy MAGA conspiracy theory. They insisted the virus must have jumped naturally from animals. Mentioning a lab origin would get you censored on social media. But behind the scenes, even Dr. Fauci and scientists discussed the likelihood of engineering, then pushed a cover story dismissing it. For over a year, fact-checkers and outlets like Facebook silenced talk of a lab leak as debunked. Fast forward to 2023, both the U.S. Energy Department and the FBI publicly concluded that a lab leak was most likely the origin of COVID-19. This came years after being mocked, censored, and banned from social media just for asking that question. FBI Director Christopher Wray said,
"The FBI has for quite some time now assessed that the origins of the pandemic are most likely likely a potential lab incident.
In other words, the supposed misinformation was true all along. The real disinformation was the establishment's denial. But why the hoax? Perhaps to protect gain-of-function researchers or avoid angering China, and certainly to undercut President Trump, who argued early on that the virus came from that Wuhan lab. This is a case where they literally flipped the script, calling the truth a lie until the evidence became overwhelming. The lab leak conspiracy theory hoax is now exposed, but not before the media and big tech credibly damaged their own reputations by suppressing honest inquiry. Now here's a hoax within a hoax. In 2021, after Joe Rogan said he took ivermectin to recover from COVID, CNN went all in to discredit him. They mocked him for taking what they called horse dewormer, even though ivermectin is a Nobel Prize-winning drug prescribed to humans for decades. But it didn't stop there. On air, CNN literally altered the color of Rogan's face, giving him a sickly green tint to make him look unhealthy. This wasn't just about one man. It was about the media twisting reality to push fear and obedience. And in this case, they got caught red-handed. In 2022, Florida passed the Parental Rights in Education Act, a law to bar classroom instruction on sexual orientation or gender identity to very young children. The media and the Democrats immediately slapped a propaganda label on it, the Don't Say Gay bill. Americans were told Florida had outlawed even saying the word gay in schools, a blatant lie. In reality, the text of the law says nothing about banning the word gay. It simply prevents teachers from conducting lessons on those sexual topics with kindergartners through third graders. Polls showed that most parents across party lines supported that idea, but activists distorted it into an anti-LGBT smear. The false Don't Say Gay moniker spread like wildfire. Even the White House and Disney jumped in to condemn Florida based on that mischaracterization. Governor Ron DeSantis had to repeatedly clarify it doesn't say that, but many outlets ignored him. This hoax was a deliberate straw man propaganda campaign. Mislabel a parental rights law as hateful and hope people won't read the actual bill. Even after the law passed, the media kept using Don't Say Gay as if it were the title. In the end, the law stood, and Florida's education department later noted nothing in it stops kids or teachers from saying the word gay in conversation. It only limits formal instruction. But the damage was done by the lie. This is a prime example of how a catchy slogan based on a hoax can mislead millions about a common sense policy. After years of failed Russia hoaxes, two partisan impeachments, and other smear campaigns, the establishment turned to outright lawfare to stop Trump. In April 2023, overweight District Attorney Alvin Bragg stretched novel legal theory to indict Trump over a 7-year-old hush money payment to Stormy Daniels. Federal prosecutors had passed on this case, and the statute of limitations was expired, until Bragg concocted a way to charge 34 felony counts of falsifying business records by tying it to a supposed campaign finance violation. In other words, it's a hoax indictment, a political hit job dressed up as law. Sure enough, the media heralded the indictment as if it validated years of claiming Trump is a criminal, while ignoring that no one else would ever be charged on such flimsy grounds. It's blatantly selective prosecution. This is the culmination of the hoaxes. When smears failed, they simply weaponized the legal system. The hoax is that these are legitimate charges, when in reality it was unprecedented election interference by prosecution. It's a crime manufactured to smear a political opponent, which might be the most dangerous hoax of all for our democracy. In 2025, during Trump's second term, liberal media outlets stirred outrage over the deportation of an illegal immigrant they labeled a Maryland man and a father separated from his family. Headlines painted the picture of a sympathetic dad ripped from his home by cruel immigration policies. That so-called Maryland man, Kilmar Abrego Garcia, had a deportation order going all the way back to 2019. He was linked to MS-13, one of the most violent gangs in the world, and federal authorities confirmed his affiliation. His record wasn't squeaky clean either. It included domestic violence and serious criminal activity, yet most outlets conveniently left that out, turning him into a victim. Even when the Supreme Court later ruled that the government must facilitate his return to continue legal proceedings, they did not say he had the right to stay, and they definitely didn't say he should be released. Trump's DHS made it clear this man posed a threat and was never some innocent dad wrongfully deported. This wasn't just bad reporting, it was a calculated attempt to rewrite the story. Calling a known gang affiliate a Maryland man while hiding his criminal background was not a mistake. It was propaganda designed to stir emotion and undermine immigration enforcement. Once again, the media tried to flip the script, but this time the facts caught up with them. And now, Iran. After all the lies we've been spoon-fed over the years, from weapons of mass destruction to Russian collusion to media cover-ups, you'd think we'd learn to question the narrative. But here we are again. In 2025, the United States just launched airstrikes against Iran. Why? Because Israel's leadership, led by Benjamin Netanyahu, claims Iran is on the verge of building a nuclear bomb. That's it. No public evidence, no international consensus, just the word of a foreign leader with a long history of pushing the US towards war in the Middle East. And let's not forget, this is the same Benjamin Netanyahu who was one of the biggest cheerleaders for the invasion of Iraq. He stood before Congress in 2002 and said Saddam Hussein had nuclear weapons and that war was necessary. He helped sell the WMD lie. Now, over 20 years later, he's back, using the same scare tactics to drag America into another potential war, this time with Iran. And this time, Trump, back in office, made the call. Unlike Bush or Obama, Trump doesn't worship the intelligence agencies or follow the globalist playbook. If he took action, there must be a reason. But it still raises the question, are we being shown real proof, or are we once again trusting the same voices that have lied to us before? We've seen this movie before. The establishment always finds a new villain, a new crisis, and a new way to send your sons and daughters off to fight. And every time, the media lines up to sell the war. Facts be damned. So before we fall for the next big lie, maybe it's time we ask, who's really pulling the strings, and why do the same people keep getting away with it? Thank you for watching.